I fucked around and fell in love with Outlander so much that I moved to Scotland. Just kidding, but sort of serious. Being creative, different, and bold aren't bad for business. They're the game changer. And if you want to grow your business by leaning into these exact things, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Haley David of Money Rebel, and you're listening to the Bad for Business podcast. Now let's dive into the episode. Welcome back, friends, to another episode of the Bad for Business podcast. If you are confused about the name changing and you're wondering why this is no longer called the Money Rebel podcast, I recommend you listen to the last podcast episode where I discuss the name change. Before we get started, I just want to say that how fitting on the day that I record this episode, Scotland decides to give me a beautiful sunny morning. I get to go into the city center later and it is such a beautiful day. So I absolutely love that for me. Today's episode is a heavily requested episode. I did a poll and 80% of the people said they wanted me to record this episode. I get asked this question all of the time from people in the US, in the UK, on why I decided to move to Scotland and uproot my entire life in July 2022. But first, I need to set the scene, give you some context because all of it is tied into why I actually decided to move. Setting the stage, my grandma tried to get me to watch Outlander for years, but I just could not get past like the first 10 minutes. And I never tried to watch it again. Well, in 2020 or late 2019, I decided to watch the show and I fell in love. Before you roll your eyes, I just want you to know there will be no Outlander slander here. It's an amazing show. The books are even better and it's filmed in like one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Watching that show was a very big reason or catalyst as to why I did move to Scotland, but not for the reason you're probably thinking. After watching Outlander, I was not expecting to move to Scotland, live in a castle, and see men in kilts everywhere. Also, fun and sad fact, you don't really see that many people in kilts unless it's for something formal like a wedding, a ceilidh, which is like a dance party. So anyways, this takes us to about 2020, the beginning of 2020. I pretty much like to describe it as going through like my caterpillar phase. Like I was in a metamorphosis, really just going through so many changes in my life. During that time, at the beginning of 2020, I was living in Loveland, Colorado with my dog Howard. And like I said, I've been going through a lot of changes for a while. I had made the decision to retire my cleaning business that I built from the ground up as a college student in 2015. And I'll do another episode later discussing that entire decision. But my focus for this episode obviously is about Scotland. When I made the decision that my cleaning company, even though it was super successful, I had multiple locations and got accepted into 2 startup incubators. Like it was a very successful company. I had the realization that it was not checking all of my boxes and that while it made the money and it checked the money box, it wasn't checking like my joy or my freedom boxes or my purpose box. And at that point in my life, I knew that I needed something more, that I didn't want to be tied to a location where my cleaning company was for the rest of my life. That decision, which predates this time period, the beginning of 2020, if I wouldn't have done that, I would have never even been able to make the decision to move to Scotland. I would have never even been put in this position in the first place because that really was the jumping off point of how I was able to even consider a move like this, which is why I'm so passionate now about helping my clients build a business that doesn't just support their clients, but also supports them and their life. And that means having a business that checks the money box, freedom, joy, purpose, all of your boxes. So back to the story. I had made the decision to leave my cleaning business, as I just said, but I didn't really know what I was going to do next. I was experimenting with starting a couple different business ideas that I had, and I really was just in a phase of rediscovering myself after I had accomplished all I had with my cleaning company. And I was asking myself questions like, what do I want to do next for my career? Where do I want to live? Do I want to go back to school and get a master's? And so on, right? I was really evaluating everything. So February 2020, COVID obviously happened. And it was just me, Howard, and my roommate's Snake. We were all trapped in the house together for lockdown. during lockdown, which was actually very strict in Colorado. And during this time, I started watching Outlander. And then because of that show, it really encouraged me to explore more whiskey tasting videos because I really loved whiskey. And I just started consuming lots of content and educating myself about Scotland, its history. And when I did that, I fell in love. It is such a beautiful country, and I really started entertaining the idea of what it would look like to move there and live there. During my metamorphosis period, that February or March is when I started my coaching and consulting business during those initial COVID months. And it felt like I was finally going to sort of come out of my cocoon phase and turn into a butterfly on the other side. I did my research and I actually planned on going there for a long visit in August 2020, but the UK and Scotland, I'm going to refer to it as Scotland because that is where I primarily live, but the UK as a whole had a much longer lockdown than the United States. So visiting Scotland during August of 2020 was not possible. I knew that, it just wasn't my time yet to move to Scotland, but it still lingered in the background. I thought about moving to Chicago or DC, and I actually came very close to both of those options. I was also headhunted by PETA in Denver, so that was on the table too. Mind you, I have never worked in corporate. To this date of recording, I have not worked for anybody else. I've been my own boss since 2015. So to even consider entertaining a job like PETA was a really big deal for me. And all of my friends were very surprised to hear that I was even entertaining working for somebody else. But at this time in my life, as you guys have heard me say, I was in a very transitional phase. I was just really exploring all my options to see what was a yes and what was a no. So obviously PETA was a no, because like I said, I've been my own boss since 2015. So 10 years. And yeah, this was just very much a huge life transition. And at the end of the day, none of those felt right. So in June 2020, I ended up leaving Colorado and moved back to my hometown in Iowa to be closer to my family while I figured out my life and where I wanted to live. During this time period, I grew my online business, I booked out with clients, and in May 2020, I decided to name my company Money Rebel. I was still very much deciding on where to move. Because I had my online business, I had the freedom to move pretty much anywhere I wanted to, which, as you heard me mention, is exactly why I decided to take the leap and retire from my cleaning company. So from June 2020 through May 2021, I had always teetered back and forth between moving to Scotland. But at that time, they were still dealing with COVID restrictions. I know lockdown and restrictions extended for quite a while. So even in May of 2021, it still didn't really seem like the right time to go because of the COVID restrictions. It's really crazy looking back and reading some of my journal entries because the strong pull that I felt to move to Scotland never went away. So I've lived in many places. I've lived in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa City, Nashville, and all of those places that I moved to, I didn't really know anyone there, except for Colorado because my brother lived there, but I still had no friends or support group really in any of those places. It was always just me and my dog Howard, us against the world, moving to new cities, new states, making new friends, and creating a life in all of those places that we lived. So to me, it did not feel crazy or unrealistic to move to Scotland. I had done so many big moves. Why couldn't I move to Scotland? That was my attitude, is like, if I wanted to move somewhere, it was like, yeah, why not? What is there to lose by doing this? Like, I never really let the fear or limitation of, I don't know anyone, I don't have a support group, I'm not from there, it's far from my family. I never really let that stop me because I just knew deep down like who I am as a person. I want to explore different places. Maybe that's because I was born in a small town. I grew up in Spirit Lake, which is a very small town in Iowa with about 5,000 people. And a lot of those people who are born there end up just staying there forever. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But even as a kid, I just knew deep down that that wasn't going to be my story, or at least I guess I hoped that it wasn't going to be my story. So that is why I was so open to moving to all of those new places. And I think it was something that my aunt Cher told me when I was moving to Arizona when I was 20, that I couldn't control what happened in my childhood. But now my life is up to me, and that whatever happens, I can always go back to my hometown. And I think that's really stuck with me over the years. So that's what I did. I would move somewhere and I'd go back to my hometown as a landing pad in between moves. So in the fall of 2021, I was still living in my hometown and I was heavily deciding where to move again. I knew it was that time. My business was going really well. I felt really grounded. And, I had that itch of like, okay, like where's my next place? Where am I going? Eventually, I kind of narrowed it down between Nashville or Edinburgh, Scotland. I think it was September or October of 2021. I had found an apartment in Nashville and I absolutely fell in love. I went and toured the apartment and it was just a done deal. If you have been in my world, followed me on Instagram, or you're friends with me on Facebook, then you will remember the apartment that I'm talking about. It was so beautiful and honestly so healing for my inner child to be living in a place like that. It was my, oh shit, I'm living in a place like this, I made it moment. So October 30th, 2021, I packed up my car with Howard as my sidekick and I made my move to Nashville from my hometown. And shout out to my grandpa who has moved me across the United States from Arizona to Nashville. I moved into that apartment with no furniture really. I had like boxes full of like my books and important papers and like a few things, but no actual furniture. The first night in my apartment, my grandpa and I ate pizza on an air mattress, and it's like one of my favorite memories. I still have the photos of us doing that, and it was incredible. I had a fresh start in that apartment, and over the months, I was able to furnish it to be my absolute dream home, and it was my favorite place I had ever lived. And hearing me say that, you might be wondering, well, Haley, like, why the fuck did you move to Scotland then? And the answer is really because that nagging feeling, that little voice just kept saying Scotland, and I just could not shake it. So I have a highlight reel saved on my Instagram if you want to go look at the pics from Nashville, and I'm going to upload some of the photos that I reference in this episode on the podcast blog post. But more on why I moved to Scotland when I seemingly had it all in Nashville. So we're going to get into a little bit of a psychology moment here. Also, fun fact, I do have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I am not a psychologist. However, having an education background in psychology, I do utilize it a lot in my life. With that being said, when I was living in Nashville, I had thought that I reached the top of Maslow's pyramid. And if you have no idea what I'm saying and totally confused on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like I recommend pause this episode, Google it, pull it up on your phone because it'll make more sense. I will also post a photo of this in the blog post as well. Basically, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, starting at the bottom level, because like I said, it's a pyramid, starting at the bottom level is physiological needs like air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. The next level is safety needs. So that's personal security, employment, resources, health, property. The level above that is love and belonging, which is like friendship, intimacy, family, a sense of connection. The level above that, which is second highest at the top, is esteem, and that is respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom. And at the very top of the pyramid is self-actualization, which is the desire to become the most that one can be. And this hierarchy of needs, it's a motivational theory in psychology that talks about human needs that can motivate human behavior. And it shows that our human needs can be categorized into this pyramid, and we move through these different stages throughout our life. So hopefully this helps you visualize what I'm talking about in terms of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs a little bit more. And I will be doing an entire episode, probably a few episodes, on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how it affects your business, sales, all of that. So stay tuned for more of those episodes. So the top two levels of this pyramid are esteem and self-actualization being at the very top of the pyramid. But as I was writing my notes for this episode, I'm processing it in real time. And I realized that when I was living in Nashville, it allowed me to get to the esteem level. So the second box from the top. And just the other day, I think it was yesterday actually, I was talking to my mom and she said, oh, Haley, in Nashville, you were at the top of Maslow's pyramid and then you decided to move and then you knocked yourself all the way down to the bottom of the pyramid after you moved to Scotland. And at the time I was like, yeah, I did. Why the fuck did I do that? But now, like I said, as I'm recording this, I realized that when I was living in Nashville, I was at the esteem level, maybe teetering with self-actualization, but I know deep down that I had to go to Scotland in order to reach the top of the pyramid, to reach the highest level of my hierarchy of needs. I knew that taking the leap to go to Scotland was the only way for me to be the most that I can be. It was truly my highest moment of self-actualization by doing this. So if I never tried or followed through with this desire I had to go to Scotland for literally years, I probably would have never felt complete and would always wonder what if. And I'm not saying necessarily that the move to Scotland was the only way for me to reach that level, because that definitely could have shifted. But looking back at my story and reflecting on this, I know for me that why I left Nashville when I seemingly had it all was because of this, because I wanted to, be the most that I can be. And for me at that time, it was to follow that pull and that desire that I had to go to Scotland. And ironically, the thing is, when I moved to Scotland, I simultaneously reached the peak of that pyramid and also sort of knocked myself back down to the bottom, which is a story for another day for part 2, because yes, I had reached my desire to become all that I could be by fulfilling my Scotland experience. I was also starting over in a foreign country. And like I said, while I had reached the top of the pyramid, my self-actualization by reaching my desire to become all that I could be, I was also starting over in a foreign country. And that meant I had no family, no support system, and no experience living there. I essentially was going through some of those bottom levels of the pyramid all over again, because I now had to figure out things like where to live, where do I buy my clothes, where do I go food shopping. When I lived in the United States, I knew how to get the food, clothes, furniture I wanted. I knew how rentals work, but I didn't know any of that stuff really in the UK. And it's one thing to research it versus actually be there and experiencing it firsthand. And I was starting over completely. I probably was working through some of the bottom levels of the pyramid. And to be honest, I probably still am, because I am still adjusting to being an immigrant living in a foreign country. I wanted to highlight this because I think it's so easy to fall into this trap where we think that once we've reached a goal or a milestone, that's it. It's our peak moment. We stay there woo, we fucking did it. We're at the top. But oh, how soon we realize that life is actually a duality of both. I'm not saying good shit always has to come with hard shit, but life gets a lot easier when we realize that part of being a human is balancing both. And that working through this pyramid of needs is just the process of life. You don't just strive to get to the top and then you die. That's it. You're at the top. That never changes. It's a constant ebb and flow. And I'm going to share more about this in the part 2 of the Scotland lore episode. But, it makes a lot of sense now why I felt so confused and conflicted when I was in the UK and eventually secured my long-term housing and all of that stuff, because I felt wow, I've reached my bucket list moment, but I also still have all of these other feelings that are really confusing. There's going to be moments where we have to work back through some of our needs, because those are just going to change over time. That's what life is about. If you're in a season of change, whatever that change may be, I hope hearing me talk about this is reassuring that the changes, iterations, and pivots that you're experiencing in your life and business, they are all part of the process and human experience. So back to the Scotland story. Now that we've discussed the question lingering in most people's minds, why did I leave Nashville when it was so amazing? And it was to get to my highest self-actualization level. Retrospectively, I can reflect and realize that it was to accomplish one of my biggest dreams. I found journal entries from September 2021 where I said, and quote, "I think God, wants me to move to Scotland." And then I also found a few photos in my phone from January 18th, 2022, which I also think was a catalyst as to how I ended up moving, because the first photo was of Edinburgh Castle, the second one was Dunnottar Castle, and then the other one was Victoria Street in Edinburgh. It's a very popular photographed street. I'm pretty sure I even set the Donator Castle photo as the background on my phone because it was just so beautiful. So I kept getting signs when I lived in Nashville that Scotland just needed to happen. I mean, my Chromecast screensaver would keep showing me photos of Scotland. My Peloton even had a scenic ride through Scotland. Like there were literally just nudges everywhere pushing me in this direction. I found, more journal entries, and one that I made on January 20th, 2022, I wrote that my word for the year was daring, which is so funny to read because holy shit, that was true. But then I wrote, I still can't shake this feeling. I'm supposed to live in Scotland. 3 days later, on January 23rd, I wrote, I am really happy and at peace. I'm proud of myself for getting to this point. I love my clients, my business, my apartment, my friends, Howard. I love myself. I still can't shake this feeling and longing for wanting to be in Scotland, but I am very happy where I am too. I'm going to visit Scotland for the month of July for my 30th birthday. So at that time, I decided, you know what? I'm going to visit Scotland for my 30th birthday. I was turning 30 in July of 2022 and I had still never flown yet. So I was like, yeah, this is my moment. I'm going to fly to Scotland for my 30th birthday and cross my biggest goal off my bucket list. As I said, life is going really good. I'm working with the best clients, doing work that I love, supporting them to grow their business. I'm taking my health seriously, just living my absolute best damn life with Howard in Nashville. I made amazing friends in Nashville. And one of my best friends was also about to move there. So literally peak levels. And then the nudges continued. By March 2022, I started to get ready for my trip to Scotland in July. And I really began all the planning. Initially, this started off as a visit to Scotland for 1 month. Then I started researching and discovering a few different things. It's like nearly impossible to fly with the dog in the cabin into the UK. And if you know me, you know that Howard was my baby. He was my rock, my ride or die, and I was not leaving him behind for an entire month. No way. He and I had been together almost every day since I got him in 2010. So that wasn't going to happen. And nor was I going to put him in the hold. I mean, he was 11 at the time. So I kept researching. And during my research process, I discovered that I could actually stay for 6 months without a visa. And that really changed everything. So I started planning a longer visit. I was going to go for 3 months to sort of make all of this hard work worth it. I researched all of the rules about coming to the UK as a visitor. You can't actively work while you're visiting in the UK, but you can maintain certain levels of communication with clients and stuff, feedback in your business. They're very strict about that. You also have to show proof of funds and savings to support yourself because you are not allowed to work in the UK, can't even volunteer. You have to show ties to the US, all of that stuff. So I was very prepared and well educated in terms of legally going as a visitor for 6 months. I had more than enough savings to cover all of my living expenses for 6 months, had all that documentation ready to show whoever I needed to. So as I'm getting this all prepped, I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I decided to get on Hinge, which is a dating app, before my visit in July to see what dating options were like in Edinburgh. I was not a dating app girly, so this was just purely out of curiosity, and I did not expect anything to come from it. And at the beginning of April 2022, I matched with a dude who was really cool and we vibed immediately. I told him that I wasn't actually in Edinburgh yet, but I'd be coming in July. So we decided to be pen pals until I got to Scotland. But then we started talking every day. We would do video chats where we'd make cocktails together, watch football, soccer, as we call it in the US, and, just talk for hours at a time. And spoiler alert, if you've been in my world for a long time, that this guy is now my husband. We've talked every day since we matched while I was still living in Nashville. So pretty cool story, and also a story for another time, because the reason why I moved to Scotland and how it all actually happened is a very detailed, long story with lots of twists and turns. So I am trying to condense this as much as possible, but also giving you the important context and sharing some of the stuff that I think is really helpful to hear. So now it's the end of April. I decided fuck it. If I'm going to go through all the effort of flying to the UK with Howard, finding a place, whatever, that I'm going to stay for 6 months. I've wanted to do this for so long. I know I can stay for 6 months legally as a visitor, so I'm going to. I was also researching visa options for staying long term, so I was very well aware of legally visiting and then what it would take for me to be able to actually live in the United Kingdom long term. When you hear me say I moved to Scotland, it's just an easy way for me to say it because technically I did visit first for 6 months and then legally move there. I knew very well like what my visa options were for staying long term. And yeah, then it was decided, I'm going to, air quotes, like I said, move to Scotland. Now that I've given you a bit more context as to why I even wanted to move to Scotland, I'm going to talk about the move process. And while obviously this isn't why I moved to Scotland, I feel like it's something very important to talk about because the Bad for Business podcast is all about showing you the real life shit that comes with, just life and business, going after goals, accomplishing them. I am pausing this episode to let you know that in the editing process, I decided to split this episode into 2 parts. The initial recording was about an hour and 30 minutes long, and in that recording, you'll hear me say that I was going to do a part 2 to discuss like the transition after I landed. So that will actually be the part 3 that comes with this, that discuss the transition after I got to Scotland. But the initial recording of why I moved to Scotland is going to be split into 2 parts. So this episode that you're listening to right now is the part 1 of the Scotland lore mini series, I guess we can call it. And in part 2, which will be released next week, I'm going to discuss more about the move process, as I said, to show you guys like the real picture of what it took to actually make this happen, because it would overlook so many things for me to just tell you like why I wanted to do this and boom, I did it. It would overlook so many things if I did that, and it would ultimately be unhelpful to those of you listening to this who have your own goals that you're going after, because I'm skipping over the most important part, right? It's one thing to want to do something, but then it's an entirely different thing to actually make it happen. So part 2 that's coming out next week is going to talk about the move process, which is how I actually made my dream of moving to Scotland happen. And in part 2, I also summarize and put all the pieces together of the story of sharing the ultimate decision on why I moved to Scotland, the move process, and some very key takeaways for you guys that I know will be super helpful. So I really hope you've enjoyed this Scotland lore part 1 episode of why I moved from the US to Scotland. Let me know what you think and tune into part 2 that will be releasing next week.